Jeff Crowe, thanks for coming in. Mob True Crimes, Fresno is in the building. We're going to get into some pretty interesting stuff today. I heard about your background. I've seen your YouTube. Man, I didn't know Fresno had such a history.
Yeah,
and you seem to know
unfortunately, it's all true and then some, probably. Yeah. Both my history and Fresno's history. We had quite a scene here for a traditional Italian organized crime, as well as a lot of others. We were, our selling points to the world are also what brings in worldwide organized crime. We're an agricultural region, and with immigration, there's usually two types of immigrants: those who settle in the big cities, and then the people that are more rural. And either way, they come in waves. I'm of Irish descent. Obviously, the Irish had a huge period of time where honest Irish folks settled, but so did a few dishonest ones.
Yeah.
Same thing with Italians, same thing with Hispanics, same with every group. And Fresno, because of the agricultural breadbasket that it is, it attracted the rural folks from all of these countries. And we had much the same situation that the big cities in America had in terms of the settlement of people that were here for less than stellar purposes. But it makes for great history.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
Well, I jumped ahead. So, real quick, Jeff, introduce yourself. Who are you? What's your background? And then we'll go into how you got into this.
So, I'm Jeff Crowe, and I am from Fresno. I am from what's called Parkside, Fresno, which is near Roding Park. And it was an area where most of the people are honest, obviously, because, not everybody from my neighborhood ended up going down the road that I did temporarily. But there was also, a lot of stuff that happened around there, racketeering activities. And I came from a family where it was unlikely for that to be my destiny. My mom was very religious, still is. My father delved into growing pot and some things like that, but he was still kind of a California, hippie 60s era kind of dude, but more conservative later on in life. But, he was from that whole kind of scene as well when I was younger. But by the time I was older, my dad was just a regular, construction worker and subcontractor. So I'm from the central part of Fresno, from Parkside and that whole area. So I could have gone in a positive direction initially rather than a negative one. I allowed my situation and my the neighborhood situation and a little bit of greed, if you will, to get to me as a younger individual. And I was kind of rebellious in my own way.
Yeah.
Very smart, but also I didn't like to listen to rules when I was younger.
Yeah, it happens. It happens.
I was in the principal's office a couple of times as a kid. So
most entrepreneurs, I don't feel like we do usually fit in on that category.
That's true. That's true. You have to be a natural risk taker in order to be an entrepreneur, especially in America. You have to be willing to. I think the country itself, in many ways, was founded upon breaking rules.
Yeah.
There's a revolution. We're in the month of July right now, and of course, July 4th, we celebrate the breaking of rules.
Yeah, a bunch of 29-year-olds calling out the British colony to war.
Right, exactly. And so
barely in their 30s.
And so and they set the trend for what eventually would become the fall of the British Empire, which was the biggest one of the era, and so we're built on violating a few rules. And that's how we became freer, was by breaking some rules.
Yeah.
So
the Parkside that you're talking about, is that the same Parkside we know today, or what was Parkside like back then? Because if we know, people from Fresno know Parkside and Malaga and Calabar, but what was Parkside like back then? Or was it still a little mischief back then as well?
Well, so Roding Park is a nice, park for the people that live outside of the area. It is a nice park, but it's had its day. It's been around a long, long time. And at one point it was, one of the main ones in the community as a whole before the expansion north as homes were developed, and Woodward Park, of course, and all that stuff, and then Clovis developed. And so there's motels that were around, Roding Park. There's still some south of Olive, and then there was some north of Olive that have now been tore out, most of the ones north of Olive. But initially, that was the old Highway 99, and that used to be a place a long time ago, 100 years ago, where travelers would just stay. Well, eventually, as they became dilapidated, it became a prostitution zone. It's a de facto red light district, and wherever you have prostitution, of course, you're going to have drug addiction issues.
Because most of us know Parkside Bulldogs, right? Now, but I'm sure it didn't start that way,
right? And that's where that's basically, the main racketeering activities over there are related to that whole industry and the drugs that are associated with it. And so the mafia, the Italian mob, actually had control over that for many, many years. And the way that it worked was that California originally had 3 mob families, 2 in the Bay Area, 1 in Los Angeles. And the LA family had sort of a San Diego faction. During alcohol prohibition, they were more separate, but they became more aligned together after alcohol prohibition. Up north, there was one in San Francisco, and then there was sort of a breakaway in San Jose as it was expanding. And so the rest of the state was what's called open in mafia terms, meaning the cities are open for any family anywhere in America.
So in the mafia, like, are you talking like from back east?
Yes.
They were operating, they saw opportunity.
That's who was operating California. Here in our part of California.
They saw the great vineyards and said, okay, this might be a good spot to set up.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Lucky Luciano, Charles Luciano, the man who's considered by every historian out there to be the father of the mob, actually sent guys out here directly to Fresno. They did a lot of expansion all over. And so Fresno was an open city. Now, the California families would have more of a right to have influence in a California city, but since it's open, the mob back east could also operate out here. And so
what year are we talking? Are we talking like 19? Before gangs got associated and all that happened. We're
talking going back into the alcohol prohibition days.
Yeah. And you said prohibition. I was like, we're going way back, way before
1920s and 30s, and really the mob, as it was once known, really had control into the early 80s. The family ultimately became called the Genovese family, which is what it's known by today. Luciano, when he ran out of the whole thing, he was deported after he got prosecuted back east. A guy named Genovese took over the operations, and they were one of the 5 families in New York that was part of their whole ruling commission. So it's a big family. And the gentlemen that were sent out here were the Sika brothers, Joe Sika, Frank. There was a few others. Joe Sika in particular was the guy in Fresno, and this guy, he took control of the heroin business, the illegal gambling stuff, sports betting, illegal
and this
casinos.
is all well known. You're not popping any. You're not sending anyone to prison right now. No, this is all written.
Yeah, he died in 1982. So if the FBI wants to dig up his body and throw him into a cell, have at it.
Yeah.
They can put his coffin into a cell all they want. But so it was a major area. In fact, Frank Sinatra, the famed singer, actually made a hotel, the Hacienda, which is at Clinton and 99 to this day, and it's now a drug and alcohol program. But originally,
that place was happening back then.
Originally, it was a nice hotel. And that whole strip of 99, which is it's now Motel Drive, but it was crazy. Golden State Boulevard and the old Golden State Freeway. That was where all that action was.
When you think Frank Sinatra, you think New York, L.A., but people forget
Vegas.
Yeah, but I mean you got L.A., we're right in the middle, and then you get to the Bay Area, you shoot over, you go to Vegas. I mean, Fresno, from what I've heard from people back in the day, they were like, Fresno was happening back in the day.
Yeah.
This place was,
absolutely.
I mean, you came to Fresno, we had the biggest, that Biker Boy movie. A bunch of movies are based off of Fresno and things out in Barstow. And so when you told me about Frank Sinatra, I was like, wow. At the Hacienda, that place must have just been a banger, must have been loud.
Absolutely. And so they had big acts that would tour and go through there. Some of the stuff from major movies were actually events that happened here. Like L.A. Confidential was a pretty big movie in the mid-'90s, and there's a scene where they show a group of shooters that are taking out gangsters in L.A. Well, one of those killings portrayed there where they took a bunch of heroin was actually a killing that happened here. The Armenian mob and Mexican organized crime had always worked with the Italians as well. And back in the day, the Italians took out a major Armenian heroin dealer before he could go to trial. And they found out later on, the FBI did, that the mob had actually corrupted the California Attorney General's office. If you could imagine, today's Attorney General is, I think,
it's
Bonta.
Been the same thing forever.
Imagine if Bonta was taking direct payoffs from Mexican drug cartels.
Yeah.
That's what this would have been like back in the 50s. Jeez. The mob had that kind of control. They also had a couple of crooked police chiefs in Fresno. That, again, this is public record. They had numerous, there was a guy named, I believe, Mortenson. He was a police chief for 20 years. He was married to the head madam of the high-class call girls of that era in the 60s and 70s. It would be like
if the 70s, man.
It'd be like if Heidi Fleiss was married to like Daryl Gates, in L.A. or if that kind of thing. And in the 50s, we had a crooked police chief. He was so crooked, the FBI had to set him up. Yeah. And so the mob was able to operate here. The New York guys had their operation. There was Mickey Cohen and some of the LA mob had a presence here. The guys from up north had a presence here. Again, it was an open city. So different families could operate, and there was so much money to be made in the Central Valley that nobody
they ran it
really
for a long
issues.
time, it sounds like.
They absolutely did. And when you have corrupt police leadership, it makes it much easier to operate. You
can do whatever you want.
Then that's the Fresno was notorious for that. We were one of the few places that can say that we had East Coast level or Chicago level corruption that was tolerated, and just people just accepted it as a way of life here. We have a reputation for being more conservative politically now, and it's kind of a pro-blue line, so to speak,
especially
when it comes
Clovis,
to police relationships. But believe it or not, for a lot of our history, we had the most corrupt police force that you could imagine. We had police chiefs and higher-up guys that were on the take. And, again, East Coast level corruption. And that's one reason why the mob was able to thrive out here for many years. They ran that region for, Parkside for a long time. They worked with the F-14, the Mexican Nuestra Familia, which are now Bulldogs. And there's a whole political side note with them, how they divided up. But they all worked together.
So they were they were like a huge corporation almost.
Absolutely.
Back then.
The mob used to work when they were away from the East Coast cities. They used to work with whichever gangs and whichever ethnic groups had majority control in a particular region, like a business-to-business kind of thing. In L.A., they worked with the Mexican mafia, the MA Up north, they worked with the Nuestra Familia, the NF, and they worked with the ABs. They worked with all
whoever
the
was set up there. They just said we can.
They worked with biker gangs in other parts of America. They were one thing about Italian dudes is they were really good at networking.
Yeah,
and that's one of the keys to their power was they could have a few guys in one area and have a huge amount of control because they knew how to network with the local gangs, and they also knew how to teach them how to make bigger money and how to corrupt institutions.
Yeah.
That's something that sets...
all the way to the political level.
You know, I'm of Irish descent, like I said, and so the Irish had places like Boston, let's say, or whatever, but Irish folks and Mexican Americans and others, we were never able to get the full institutional level control that Italians were able to accomplish.
Yeah.
That's one thing that really sets them apart from other criminal organizations.
Maybe the cartel nowadays, but
yeah, and they can say they have that same kind of control like in Mexico, right? It is very similar. They use drug prohibition in Mexico to have that kind of institutional control that the Italians were able to get through alcohol prohibition in America.
Yeah.
And once they got it with alcohol prohibition, the profits that were around back then, even when alcohol policy was changed and re-legalized, by then they had it. They had the police departments fully corrupted.
Yeah.
They had mayor's offices. They had state legislatures. They had some members of Congress and things like that.
Yeah.
And you know, the corruption just shifted. You know, prostitution and drug trafficking, illegal gambling, the other rackets that picked up bigger once they lost alcohol prohibition. But alcohol prohibition really is the nexus that allowed the Italians to go from being just another organized crime group or street gang and that kind of stuff to being the institutional masters that they became.
Yeah.
That's what sets them apart from any of our groups, Irish, Armenians, Mexicans, you name it, Russians. It was their ability to do that. Of course, they've faded out now, but they did leave their mark. They had a long history in Fresno.
Well, I've heard they never really went
different.
away. You know, they're just a little more organized in other areas. And like, I heard this one podcast say they never left Vegas. You know, this one guy was saying, well, they used to be here, and the guy said they never left. They're just more careful now. You know, with because so many things like we were talking about are legal now.
They're
gambling, marijuana, all these things are legal. So they say they never really go away. They just get more organized.
It's like water going through the path of least resistance. You can dam up this area, and then all of a sudden it's flowing over here.
Yeah.
So, like with Vegas, as an example, the FBI did an effective job of kicking them off of the skim, which is portrayed in Casino, where in that movie Casino, De Niro and Joe Pesci with the Chicago outfit, just who they represented in real life, as well as other mob families, the LA mob being another one. They used to take the casino profits and then they would skim off the top before reporting it for taxes. They'd take $1 million out in a suitcase, right?
Jeez.
Which was a lot back then, $1 million a month, you know, whatever. And so the FBI did kick them out of that, right? But then the mob it says, okay, we'll just take control of the drug business in Vegas now, or we'll take control more of the call girls in Vegas. The, you know, obviously
it's your city. It's
right.
Just the whole city's yours.
you get them in one area, they start taking over another.
Yeah,
they'll take, you know, But they definitely, like with the Stardust as an example.
Until they get directly to the police.
Right.
To the chief.
You take the Stardust, the skim that is portrayed in Casino.
Yeah.
When it was seized by the FBI, which they showed towards the end of the movie, right? And it was actually sold to a legitimate owner. The legitimate owner who took over, or the corporation, I should say, they had no clue the amount of money that was actually being brought in because it had been skimmed for so long, right?
Wow.
So when they finally did actually see,
tax-free.
The first corporation that took over after the mob had it, discovered they had a way more valuable piece of property than they knew of, because for years the mob had been reporting a certain level of income from it. Well, when you took the skim out of it, the profits from the Stardust were much, much higher. So it was one of those things where the new corporate owners were like, wow, we got it for X amount based on this estimate.
Yeah.
And it turns out we're
making
sitting
way
on
more money than they
it
thought.
was making way more money we could have ever imagined.
Jeez.
And because of how much money was being robbed.
Yeah.
Well, it's their money, right?
On paper, they were only making this much, but
the mob was, they say we're robbing. Well, who are they robbing? They're robbing the IRS out of future tax dollars. By taking money out before reporting, there was less money reported to the IRS, and that's how that was the scam there.
Man.
But they moved into other areas. That's what they do.
Yeah.
Path of least resistance. Wherever they're going today, the FBI is going.
Well, there's
today,
always new trends,
they're
new
gonna
things
find,
to get involved in. And
yeah, they got involved with pump and dump schemes once this racket gets taken out. Marijuana became a big one after alcohol, right?
Yeah.
Now that marijuana is legal, they'll get
Not as
into
valuable.
whatever. So yeah.
So you are like a thesaurus for this stuff. Obviously, your YouTube and all your channels are called True Crime or
Mob True Crime. Yeah.
Mob True Crime. What got you into this? How did you go down this rabbit hole of just like knowing every in and out? I mean, you know the names, you know the dates, you know everything. Was this just on your own, or did you get into a little trouble yourself? Like you were already kind of involved in this thing, and then just became. I mean, have you always known about all this history, or
when I was younger, we used to have limited, TV, of course. We didn't have an internet when I was a kid in the 80s. So you might see a mob documentary occasionally, and you might see them on the news. When I remember as a kid seeing all the major busts, right?
Yeah.
The FBI would bust 20 guys in New York. They'd bust 10 guys in Los Angeles. They'd busted up the guys in Vegas. So I remember seeing that as a kid. Now, I personally got into it as an 18-year-old. I was involved with illegal marijuana sales here in California. And one of my friends had lived in and out of Michigan his whole life. Here, he would go from here to there to there, And as an 18-year-old, he moved back there. And it just so happened that his aunt was dating one of the connected guys back there, a guy that was heavily involved in the pop business.
Yeah.
And so I ended up getting connected with the Detroit, with one of the Detroit crews based on that. And so, the price of marijuana in California was much cheaper than it is in interior states in general. Especially for stuff coming across the Mexican border back then. Mm-hmm. So states like Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California, being border states, we get the best prices for Mexican grade marijuana back then.
Yeah.
Now, in today's world with legalization, most people are smoking the stuff from Humboldt County and Mendocino and the high grade and the mid-grade grown stuff. You don't see it like it used to. But back in prohibition, if you will, in those days, the variety wasn't quite the same. And in Mexico, they could grow it much quicker, and they could brick it up for trafficking purposes, and they could get it across the border, and they could get it to us for anywhere from $300 to about $500-600 a pound in Fresno, mind you. The closer you are to the border, the cheaper it's going to get, as well as the more that you buy at one time, the cheaper it's going to get. Like any other product, you buy in bulk at Costco, any product, it's going to be cheaper, right? Mm-hmm. So the prices here were like a third or a fourth of what they cost in Michigan. Yeah, and so my friend who moved back there, his aunt was dating one of the guys that was pretty high level in that business, and they had already been scoring weed in Texas, so, and so he brought up, hey, I got a ton of friends in California, And I was one of a few that he approached for that. And initially I turned it down after talking to some of my Mexican friends. They were like, we're doing fine making money here. And we already have enough issues with the DEA. Mm-hmm. The last thing we need to do is be involved with the mob, because that's going to track the FBI on top. Back then, federal agencies and state agencies did not coordinate nearly as good as they do now with today's internet and apps, and it's a completely different ballgame. A lot of times they had their own turf back then. The DEA wouldn't always tell the FBI about stuff they were doing, and vice versa, or they wouldn't tell local law enforcement out of concern that there might be a corrupt police chief. Like Fresno. They were, the DEA was probably not so quick to talk to Fresno detectives back then. Sometimes I'm sure, they did on certain things, but some things they probably were like, we can't trust the locals. Or we can't trust the state troopers in certain states. So,
it's all getting in somehow. They're probably thinking.
There was different, so it was a different ball game at the time, and so my guys were like, we don't need to attract the FBI's attention too. We already, we're doing fine. And so initially I had turned it down, and then later on I ended up getting enticed into it, and I got involved, and I started moving weight between this state and Michigan. And I did that for approximately, from late 1993 is when I first got introduced. And it really didn't get rolling, though, till 1994. Mm-hmm. And I stopped doing it right around 2002 as I was graduating from college. So, and I got involved with the illegal gambling as well, dice games and things like that. And then I also got involved with the sale of high-grade marijuana from Mendo and Humboldt. I have friends in the Triangle to this day, that we call it the Triangle. It's, Netflix did a series on it called Murder Mountain, and they call it that because it is a dangerous place. High-grade pot's grown there. Back in the day, it was more hippies and those kinds of dudes. Now it's a lot of cartel stuff, and those guys don't play around. And it's an area where you don't get cell phone service, so if you're there,
stuff going on in that area too. People just disappear. There's history of 8 people just flying in a plane, gone.
Yeah, they just vanish into thin air, and I mean, people can get clipped up there, and there's wild animals.
Good place to grow.
And same thing, eastern part of our county. This foothills of the Sierras. It's very similar elevation, and so
airplanes start ticking weird, and I've heard of that. Just a weird area in general.
And it's just and also with anything with mountains and all that, keep in mind, anytime there's a bust, there's only so many roads, right? So if you're growing and you're at the top of a mountain, you can see the agents coming up.
Just follow the water lines.
You run down. I've had friends busted up there, and I had a friend actually busted by the DEA Black Hawk helicopter. He's the only dude that I know that can say that he literally got chased by Airwolf. That old show. Literally imagine a military grade helicopter chasing you around the mountains of California. But they have to patrol with that kind of stuff. They have to take pictures from above with aircraft, and so it's a crazy place. But so I was involved with all that kind of stuff, high grade pot, and then of course the lower grade stuff from Mexico that costs us a lot less, but still made a good profit back east. And then some illegal gambling and that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So did you ever get caught, do time, whatever, anything like that ever happen?
Not in that stuff, but I did get caught in my early days for theft related stuff and trading marijuana for stolen goods. When I was younger, I was dumb, and every single guy that gets involved with organized crime always starts off with low level stuff. You don't start off being a cartel boss, so to speak. You don't start off being a high grade seller or a trafficker. You start off with selling smaller bags. You know, when you're a teenager, you start off with, oh, you want to trade this for that? Okay, I'm not going to ask too many questions about how cheap you're able to get me this stuff for. And you're sure ain't going to ask me where I got my pot from, right?
Yeah.
But so lower end stuff like that. And I learned my lesson though from those experiences. And if you're smart at it, you will learn your lesson, and you'll learn what you're good at and what you're not good at. And with me, I learned that I was much better at logistics and moving things than I was at being involved with stuff that requires you to run from the police. And I was better at dealing with business-related crime like racketeering stuff than I was with street-level stuff. And so with me, the way it evolved was I just naturally geared myself more towards business. And as I was moving along with the mob stuff, I found that I sucked at growing pot, for instance. I tried to grow pot a couple years. I absolutely do not have a green thumb, but I was smart enough to know that others that do, that I can sell it, I can get rid of it for them.
Yeah.
And so my main history became more of a sales and a trafficking end of it. I was very good at I was better at talking to the cops one-on-one during a traffic stop with stuff in my trunk and keeping them at ease and not getting too nervous than I was at running from them for, stupid crap. And, you kind of learn through trial and error in the criminal world. You figure out, well, gee, I keep getting arrested when I do this kind of thing, so maybe I shouldn't be doing this kind of thing anymore. Yeah. It's sort of like the financial white-collar crime guys. They figure out
path
pretty
of least
quickly.
Resistance.
Yeah, they figure out pretty quickly that they're going to be much more effective at robbing a bank using a pen and a computer system than they are pulling up with a gun and a mask and a bag saying to fill this up. Yeah. Whereas there's some dudes that they wouldn't be able to fill out a bank form to save their life.
Everyone's built different.
But they certainly have the balls, so to speak, to go in and rob an armored truck for $250,000, right? There's just some dudes that they're geared for.
Everyone has their specialty.
Yeah, that's how you find out through trial and error. What you're good at and what you're not. And so for me, I was better at just doing business-related stuff, selling pot and doing illegal gambling. I was good with numbers, so doing dice games, I was good at that. I was good at adding up in my head very quickly how much a payoff should be on a craps table or a roulette table. And I enjoyed that stuff a lot more, too, because it's more honest in my view. Even though I was violating the law, I never really liked even trading pot for stolen stuff, to be quite frank, because I always felt like, well, what would I do if that was my stuff that was stolen and being traded? And I found the guy that did it. I'd want to, want to shoot the frickin' guy over that, How dare somebody rob me? So how can I go say how dare people steal from me if I'm going to be involved with, that kind of stuff with others, So I just, from a moral point of view, I could justify it better in my mind anyways that, hey, I'm just selling weed, bro. I'm just running. I'm an event planner. When it comes to dice nights and roulette nights, I'm throwing casino action parties, So that's kind of how it evolved, and the mob liked that stuff better too. Anyways, they don't really. Most of the older dudes, they don't like street crime, and that's why the old adage of, mobsters would say, and you'll hear even Italian people now or Irish folks or, even Hispanics will say about the cartel guys, our neighborhoods are way safer with those guys in control of the street corners. And the reason why is they kept all the street crime guys out of there. Yeah. Mobsters would keep the low-level clowns that would steal your car out of the neighborhood, right? Same thing with, the guys that are major drug dealers. especially in the weed game or whatever, well, they would keep the riffraff kind of criminals out. And so the regular citizens were cool with us, for that kind of stuff.
Well, they say that's when things get really bad, right? Is when the head boss, someone goes down, because now it's just everyone wants to get to the top, and that's when the crime starts again. So it's kind of like that.
Yeah, and also, when you're doing like pot sales and that kind of stuff, or like alcohol prohibition, let's just say, it's very analogous. They want to maintain good relations with the local citizens.
Yeah, you don't want to be in the paper every weekend, people getting shot and killed. Yeah, you don't want to.
They keep other criminals from committing violence around there. Mm-hmm. And they also, as a lot of times, like what Al Capone used to do, soup kitchens, right? Well, a lot of times dudes that are in the weed game back in the day wanted to do volunteer work or give back or give money to the poor or do Poverello House kind of work.
Yeah.
That's the truth of it. There's a side of you that becomes more philanthropist than street criminals. So it's weird. It's sort of like a good undercover cop or a good undercover federal agent knows how to blend in with criminals, right? Yeah. Well, a good racketeer type criminal knows how to blend in with regular citizens and within the regular business community. Mm-hmm. Good racketeers, I hung out more with business dudes than I did than criminals. At the higher up I got on the food chain, I found myself hanging around with like small businessmen because I saw myself as being no different than another small business owner.
Yeah.
At that point. And, I'd be like, hey, I'll buy drinks for everybody. Let's have a good time, you guys. And when and going into college at Fresno City,
you have a service just like the rest of them.
That's how I looked at it. I looked at it like marijuana was not a huge deal. Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy because it's not anymore.
Yeah, in today's world.
Now it's pretty nuts. How many people went to prison that are still sitting there going, wait, now it's legal?
Right.
So do I get out? What are we doing?
And that's another thing that, with legalized marijuana.
No violence, I'm just sitting here.
Right. And now there's pot shops all over places like L.A. and up north and even in Fresno where it's more conservative. Mm-hmm. We have a few now and people don't think anything of it. There's a pot shop right next to, GB3 and River Park.
Yeah, they look like a clean CVS with just a little green cross on it.
Right, exactly.
And you walk in and there's glass and it's all white and you feel like you're at a doctor's office. And they got all these cool names and there's a guy back there, hey, what do you need? And you're just like, this looks like a futuristic CVS.
Right.
Imagine getting out of prison and walking in going, I could have had one of these.
Exactly. And it's like I look at those places too and I'm like, they'll never give a license to a guy like me who is a ground floor. I was breaking the rules in order to make sure this stuff got legalized. Yeah. And by the way, a side note, in 1996, I actually funneled illegally obtained marijuana money into the Prop 215 medical use campaign. I helped finance the campaign for this region. I literally, I coordinated with the people who made the proposition and was like, well, what do we do in Fresno and Madera? They're like, whatever you want, bro. It's on the ballot. Just do normal get out the vote stuff and, pay people to knock on doors. I'm like, okay, that was actually the first political campaign that I ever did. And I would end up doing that later on in life with my career stuff. But they won't hand out the permits to guys like myself who actually risked my future. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with illegal gambling, though, right? They're not going to hand out gambling permits
now you got
to
gambling
mobsters.
Apps. I can go gamble on an app right now and lose all my money.
Exactly.
No one's getting in trouble.
All the guys that risked our A's, our futures, we won't get permits for these places, but hey, I get the satisfaction of knowing, I guess, that, you know what, I was doing this back when these guys could have gone to prison for 30 to 50 years for what they're doing now.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like, hey, what the heck, you know? So
Yeah.
now I can sell my story. How's that?
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Well, we were talking about how you kind of started getting out of it because California has the 3-strike law. And I thought that was interesting. You were telling me about, that actually made quite a few people want to get out of it because those 3 strikes, you're done. It's like, man, it wasn't worth it. And tell me about that. What was your venture getting out of it?
Well, here's the truth of it. When it comes to street crime too, like the trading of pot for stolen stuff, for vandalizing things, being an idiot as a kid, right? The 3 strikes law, truth be told, was one factor that got me and other kids I knew that were troubled at that time and young adults away from those types of crimes and moving into racketeering only and less violence within the rackets too. Whether, a lot of people, we live in a world where we want to reform the system and you'll have people say defund this or that. The truth of the matter is I saw firsthand how the 3 strikes law was extremely beneficial for the average citizen. Now, it costed a fortune in new prisons and it went too far in some ways, but
filled those prisons quick.
But I will say this, my old neighborhood went from being dangerous for the average citizen in the 80s and the early 90s to where by the late 90s, people could walk, elderly people could walk at 10 or 11 in the evening.
Wow.
And walk to the store without having to worry about gangbangers and others accosting them. And it wasn't like there wasn't any gangbangers and mobsters left. What was happening was a lot of them did get sent away, and we watched as what would happen to the other guy.
Made you guys all change your mind a little bit?
And people chilled.
Yeah.
We started solving our problems more through talking than violence.
Yeah.
And that is the truth.
Maybe we should work together and not all go to prison.
Right.
Let's do that.
And so I would say California went in the wrong direction policy-wise because nowadays people see these videos. Kids are able to break the glass at Nordstrom's and empty the place out. I think
we only have like 3 CVS's left in Fresno. They're all gone.
The blatant lawlessness in California has to go.
That Prop 47 really.
Yes. I hate to say it, but some of our reforms went too far in the pro-criminal, kind of. So, but I will say this: the 3 strikes law, in its own way, did have a positive effect in terms of what it allowed for regular citizens to be able to do in their freedom to roam the streets. You see it now, like with El Salvador, right? That new president built super prison, right?
That guy cracks me up.
You see the images of these guys with tats being ran into prisons with their hands like this.
The whole prison's just one gang. Yeah, it's insane.
And now when you see interviews on the streets, regular citizens talk about how my grandmother can walk the streets at 9 or 10 at night now.
People are driving cars again because they said it wasn't worth driving a car because it was going to get stolen. And down there, they only get old school classics because they don't get the new imports. I never thought of that.
So the truth
I was like, wow, you can't even have. They're like, why own a car if it's going to get stolen? I just walk everywhere.
The truth is that
crazy.
That we do need to have something in between a very tough on crime setup and something that allows for reform as well.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this as a former racketeer, criminal, street criminal, etc., who's now Joe citizen with a kid of my own who's 18 years old. So, I want safe streets for my children.
It's bad for
my
business.
Child. And you know what? It was good for the criminals too, because quite frankly, my friends that got sent to prison are going to hate me for saying this, but because some of my bros were sent up under that law. But it was good for all of us as a collective because we did chill out. Yeah. It got us to chill out. It got some dudes just flat out to stop committing crime altogether. And they went to college. I was one that went to college myself. They went and they're doing better for themselves thanks to that law. Others stayed in the criminal world, but they lessened what they were doing. And they did not go out committing as many violent acts anymore.
Yeah.
Then there was an element that it doesn't matter what the law says, they're just nuts and they're going to do what they do. But the truth is that, that 3 strikes law in its own way, it
made the game more competitive, almost in a way. Like, we got to go a different.
It helped me out in the sense that a lot of the thugs that I would have probably had to deal with in a different way, or mobsters would have had to deal with in a different way like that, we didn't have to, because the law took them off the streets for us and put them in prison before any of that kind of stuff could happen.
Yeah.
And I did see, again, I saw dudes that were really
brain
thugged
power
out
at that point.
that chilled out.
Yeah.
The law did chill people out. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying we should bring it back like that, because it was harsh on some ways and on some levels, but we do need something similar. We need to have a carrot and a stick. We have too much leniency now. It's not
have
good for the
extremists.
youngsters
Yeah.
to have this kind of leniency, because it's teaching them that they could keep going further and further and progressing into the criminal world, and ultimately they are going to find themselves in situations where they do things that they won't be able to get out of. And if they would have had that deterrent effect there, they would have stopped at a certain point rather than progressing more violent and violent and violent. Mm-hmm. And again, there's certain crimes that society will never tolerate. And if you have a deterrent effect at a certain zone, it does work. And it works for, it's good
That's why
for
we have
everybody.
speed limits, and
Sure.
they know we're going to do 80, but they put 65 because they know we're going to push it, but we're not going to do 100. Kill somebody or ourselves.
There's some truth to that. There really is. It's human nature to push the limit on some of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you were saying that, like your neighborhood became safer, or like in El Salvador, people can walk around again. And I saw what's happening in San Francisco. Well, the other thing that happens is that jobs go away.
Right.
San Francisco, Nordstrom, Nike, Gucci, Dolce, all those major brands, like down that Fashion Valley or whatever it was in San Francisco, gone.
Yes.
Which just got rid of how many jobs? So now those people got to move, and now the cops are. It's just a huge mess.
It creates a vicious cycle where,
if you love your neighborhood, don't commit the crimes. Don't do that. I can't remember. I think it was 50 Cent. He was basically talking about once he got to a certain level, the crime went down, because don't do that over here. People walk their kids right here. People go over there, and if you don't, we're going to deal with you. And I was like, wow. He became kind of like the not a cop, but
a regulator.
Muscle. Yeah, like a regulator. And I was like, wow, that is interesting, because you can't go to school, you can't, no businesses want to be in a neighborhood that, they do their research. I wouldn't open up a spot, in a downtown area where there's good violence. I was like, no one's going to come here.
Your store's going to be,
it's going to get robbed, looted.
You're absolutely right, because I hit that zone where I was finding myself telling others, you got to stop, knock this stuff out, or get lost. And, I had I met a group of Nuestra Familias, NFs, guys that were, that's the old F-14. And one of the ways I met a whole group of them that lived in my neighborhood was, while 2 or 3 of them were in prison, one of their sons, who grew up without his dad because they went to prisons in the 80s when I was a kid, I was in a Walgreens, and I see this 12-year-old Mexican kid stealing, and I'm like, kid, you ain't got to do that. Here, I'll just buy whatever whatever candy. I watched him as he was doing it, and I'm like, man, and I'm a 19-year-old at this point who's moved up the ladder quickly. I got a ton of cash. I told the kid, look, I'll just, I had recognized him as being related to some high-level gang members that were in prison anyway, so doing a favor for them in a way, too. So I'm sort of helping myself. I'm like, kid, let me just buy this for you. So I walk him out after buying the stuff so he doesn't have to steal it. And I go, aren't you so-and-so's son? And he's like, yeah, my dad's in prison. He's been in prison for 7 years now. And I'm like, how old are you? He's like, I'm 12. Basically, since the kid was 5, right? That was the last time he had seen his father. Mm-hmm. And his father was a major drug runner, major weed guy. He got caught with 100+ pounds and got sent to Corcoran and all this stuff, right? So when his dad came home, his dad called me up, and said, hey, I want you to come over and I need to talk to you. And I wasn't sure what it was going to be about. And the first thing he did was he shook my hand and said, man, I really appreciate what you did for me, for my son that one day. I just got home like literally a week ago, and my son told me that he stopped stealing at the store because you told him to quit doing it, and you bought him his stuff the one time, and you told him stop stealing around here. You know, what would your dad think, right? And he's like, you know, that takes some cojones. You know, you're a white boy telling my son not to do that. He's all, I really appreciate that, you know, because I don't want my son going to prison.
Yeah.
Like you know, two of his brothers were still in like Corcoran and Wasco, places like that. He was the first one paroled, and then one of his brothers got
you got to
paroled
break
a few
that
months
generation
later.
eventually.
Right. And so, you know, here you have a Nuestra Familia, you know, an NF kind of, you know, organized crime Mexican dude who himself went away for 100+ pounds, set up, you know, got a decent amount of time in the California system, telling me thank you for telling his son to stop.
Yeah.
And of course, by then I'm 19, and he's all, I've heard that you're now a pretty big player. Last time I remember seeing you, before I went away, you were just some white boy on your BMX riding around here. He's like, I remember seeing you, Jeff, as a kid, you know, as a skater, and you know, you were a skateboarding kid and a BMX kid, and now you're pretty, you know, I hear you're pretty important now. But it is the mentality that you get as you get more important in the racketeering world. You start telling the other people to stop doing this stuff.
Yeah.
So it is a dichotomy. It's a weird kind of,
you might not have much of a choice, but they do, and you're like, there's better things. Well, like it's just like in the movies, you know, you see like a lot of these mob guys, their kids are lawyers, their kids are doctors, you know, their kids are. It's like, no, you're not going to go this way. I made a lot of money, but you're going to school. You're going to stay away from this. It's funny,
especially with Jewish gangsters. That was one big thing, like the Meyer Lansky,
Wall Street.
That's what they did, is that the Jewish gangsters would insist that their sons go to school.
Yeah,
they would be like, that's one thing that separated them out from you know, Italians and Irish dudes and Mexican dudes don't want their kids to sign up, but if their kids try to sign up, they'll do the old, all right, well then sign up under me so that I can show you the ropes. Yeah. A lot of the Jewish gangsters will insist their sons stay out at all costs.
Gotcha.
And so you'll like Meyer Lansky and these guys, there's a lot of Jewish dudes that were involved with Irish and Italian organized crime and were high level guys, and they were crazy shooters and all that, and prohibition guys. But you'll notice with them in particular, they always insisted their kids go to school. They never let their, you know.
Yeah. They cut it off at their generation.
Yeah,
that was it.
They were like, I'm going to be a gangster and a racketeer. Mickey Cohen didn't want his, you know, he was a boss of L.A. You know, he didn't want his kids signing up. Now, mind you, Italian dudes, Hispanics, and Irish dudes and Armenians also didn't want, you know, their kids, but they would maybe make an exception if their kid was.
The Jewish community was really known for just cutting it off
strict.
right there. This was our generation. That's it.
It was a smart move on the part of Jewish gangsters. Is they were they really did insist that their sons stay out of it at all costs. And of course, the others, again, they didn't want their kids, but if their sons started doing it, John Gotti Sr., right? He let his son do it anyways. Now
then he was on a TV show, and it's like, oh, that was probably too much heat. You don't want to slip up off mic, and that's not a
right. Now John Gotti Jr. would denounce it all, and he left it all. But he would, you know, John Gotti Jr. unfortunately, you know, followed his dad for a while, and he ended up going to trial 4 or 5 times. Much like his dad, they kept trying him and trying him and trying him. Well, the Jewish guys were smart enough. I heard that TV
show wasn't a good move.
Yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of I'm not a huge fan of most of the reality TV shows. Yeah. It takes a lot for a reality TV show for me to like. But the mob based ones were some of the worst.
Oh, really? Yeah.
It just, you know, reality TV, they play for the camera. I'm not a huge fan. If it's going to be reality TV should be actual reality.
Yeah, no scripts.
You know, but they get them sauced up, and the producers
they just
start an argument somehow, you know. But
my favorite one is those. What was it? It's It's like the Housewives one, or there's something with all
Real Mob Housewives one.
Didn't like people, that one lady went to prison.
Yeah.
And basically she was on the show flaunting all her stuff, and then the IRS started watching the show. And you hear about a lot of stuff like that. You know, a lot of like these Real Housewives people.
That's another reason not to if you're actually involved with the mob, don't do a reality show. If you really are involved with crime or you're related to any of them, don't do any stuff on TV. Avoid
you start drinking,
media.
You slip up, you say some things off mic you weren't supposed to, and it's like,
well, plus you also, if you think about it, the FBI, the DEA, or whoever would love to hear people making threats against others. And if you're sauced up, you're in the moment arguing with somebody, I'll have you effing killed.
Yeah. Do you know who
this is great. Like, oh yes. Do you know who my father is? They're like, that's beautiful for a courtroom.
Yeah.
If you're trying to prosecute those guys.
Don't do that. Those shows crack me up. So many people get busted and go to prison on those shows, man. It cracks me up.
That's a whole other problem.
Everyone gets messed up.
As a whole, bro.
Yeah.
You got guys that are rappers go to prison because they were rapping about their crimes. You got kids today.
That happens a lot nowadays.
They rob a bank or whatever, and they're showing off in an Instagram video.
In their Instagram.
Yeah. Look they're showing off the stacks of the money they stole.
Yeah, and it still has the purple band. They're like, I know what bank that's from.
Hey, that's from Wells Fargo. Hey, he did the heist. I'll tell you right now, the old mob, they would hate social media. Okay, the old mob would probably
all their kids would probably have flip phones today.
The old mob would eliminate a lot of people if they saw all the crazy stuff on social media, and really the old gangsters as a whole, all the old black gangsters like the Frank Lucases of the world, and all these legendary figures from Harlem from years ago. If they saw how black gangbangers are now, showing off stuff on social media and rapping about what they just did, they would have them all killed. Okay, they would just for that alone. The mentality
if you look up Frank
today.
Lucas, you only find him on Google in a suit.
Right.
Just 3-piece suit.
And in the old days, whenever the media used to film mobsters, what was the number one pose for a mobster? The number one pose was this. They would walk by, they would put a newspaper up to their face. Yeah. They would try not to be filmed.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
They were trying to avoid the media. And in today's world,
and you can't escape the cameras either. I mean, if something happens in the streets today, someone's going to record it. It's going to be on Instagram, Facebook. Hashtags are going to fly around.
Yeah,
you're getting caught. The cameras, people's doorbell rings. I mean, it's
if you're
insane.
doing crime today, you're stupid. Number one. Number two, if you are going to do it, stay off of all social media. Don't have any profiles. But even then, there's a problem with that. The feds expect everybody in today's world to have social media profiles, right?
Yeah.
And if you're not doing any of that stuff, then you still stand out in your own way. They
may or may not be working with Facebook and getting into these outlets. Twitter.
They may not be. They
may or may not be.
They may or may not be working with Google and every.
Yeah.
Of course, we know the government has all that stuff.
Yeah.
So if you're committing crime today, you're an idiot.
Or deny.
Just don't even do it.
Yeah.
It's not worth it. It never was worth it. But it's certainly not worth it now.
Yeah.
Obey the law, when it comes to racketeering and criminal activity.
Yeah.
I'm not one of these blind obedience people, but at the same time, don't be a criminal if you're out there. Because there's just too much stuff. You can't enforce the rules like you used to be able to either. If, any people will shoot somebody over business, let's say, but they always get caught now, or the government at least knows who they are. Mm-hmm. It's extremely rare that somebody commits violence to enforce racketeering stuff without the government at least knowing who they are.
Yeah.
Like you said, there's a camera everywhere. Their whole thing, there's too much technology, and you're not going to beat them. You're not going to beat. And it's
what do
going to
they
get
say?
even
Don't
worse.
look up. Satellites beaming down on you, and
And you're not going to
4K.
beat AI and supercomputers. You know, for the kids that are out there, you know, when you're on YouTube, right? Magically, YouTube's very good at picking out the kinds of videos you're apt to watch. Sometimes sometimes I'll find myself on my YouTube account, right? And I'm like, wow, how on earth did they know that this is exactly what I want to watch? Well, there's a lot of data.
We're
that goes
listening
into
and
it.
watching you all the time.
Right. And so now, though, detectives and federal agents have access to apps that are going to be able to predict what you're going to do next. So I don't even see how anybody can even operate in today's world without detection.
Yeah.
You know, now, whether they prosecute you or not depends on the resources they have, you know, and whether your number comes up, so to speak, and there's room in the prison and, you know, blah, blah, blah. But in terms of them knowing or not knowing who you are, they're going to know who you are. Yeah. It's just a matter of, is it your time, you know?
Yeah.
Now, earlier I was talking about how kids now they can break, you know, they can rob and steal and this, that. That's only because of lax enforcement of laws. But in terms of knowing who you are, they are going to know who you are.
Yeah.
Now, whether they choose, again, do you want to be in that pool of people where they can pick you out and decide to pull you in or not? You know, so that's why you know, even if you took the moral part of it out of it, it's still from a technology standpoint a bad choice to get involved with crime, any kind of crime now. Yeah. It's just the numbers are not in your favor. Yeah, you know, and nobody, even in the old school days, how many old school dudes could say, even starting in the 1920s or 30s as a young man, they committed crime and they made it all the way till they were 80 or 90 years old without a single arrest. Yeah. It does not happen. Even in my situation with 10 years in the game, I still had a few felony arrests. And when they would catch me on misdemeanor stuff, they would always prosecute me as harsh as they possibly could because they knew who I had been. And that's another thing with the system.
Without all the technology everywhere. You know, I mean, if you're even in a room like with me and I have stuff on my background and, you guys link up together. This is the spot you guys were at on this date. And you take a picture, you can look at the date, the location. It's like, I don't know how anybody gets away with anything nowadays.
And they could track your phones. And then even if you don't take your phone with you, let's say you're some dude that's in the game and you leave your phone at home, well, you know what's going to happen is the FBI or the DEA is going to say,
well, your car has Wi-Fi.
Well, that stuff. But they're also going to say, we noticed the trend that every time that we filmed him doing a drug transaction, his cell phone was always at his house. And we noticed that every Tuesday at this time, his cell phone was magically always at his house. And it would sit in the same spot for 6 hours. Yeah. So they're going to still be able to use your lack of use of technology against you. Yeah. They're going to be like, okay, he carried his cell phone on him all the time, except for these and these days. And magically, even at his house, you know, when you walk around your home, typically you have your cell phone in your pocket. Now, except when you're sleeping, right? You'll have it on your nightstand or whatever. So even when you use the restroom, most people take their cell phone in there, play video games or read the news that way or watch videos. If you're walking outside of your home, you know, into your yard, you're sitting there listening to music while you're sitting by your pool or whatever. So your phone is still moving around a little bit. Yeah. Well, the FBI, the DEA, or whoever, they're going to notice that his cell phone sitting there at his house, never moving for 4 hours at a time. And we happen to be filming him out in public doing this and this and this during these times. Yeah. So they can still use your lack of tech usage against you as well, because it's still setting a pattern, and patterns are what they base cases after. They once they figure out what you do in the criminal underworld, it's just a matter of time of them. Back in the day, they would have to watch you physically long enough, or they would put, they would put trackers on your car or stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Or they would clone your pager in the old pager days. But
you can't take your battery out of your phone nowadays.
Once they figured out what your pattern is, then they would figure out how to get you, right? Well, our phones literally set our patterns and clock our patterns for us and for them. And so even if you don't take your phone with you, that becomes part of your pattern. He just magically doesn't do this at this and this time. They could still, there's no way out of their matrix anymore.
Yeah.
There's a few famous guys that use the word the matrix when they're talking about the system or whatever. But really, it sort of is like that. They can track everything you do, and no matter what steps you take to avoid not being tracked, you're still setting a pattern.
Yeah.
All the steps you take now, the old tricks don't work anymore. Again, they're going to know who you are. And it's just a matter of time before your card gets pulled, so to speak.
Yeah.
And in today's world, even worse, they can utilize all that as a way to get you to conform to other things. I don't think it's a secret that in today's world, the government wants to control citizens as a whole and corral the population into certain things. And if it was up to the government, the Constitution would be destroyed, and it would have been destroyed a long time ago. And, certain amendments in particular protect others, and there's other things that protect our rights overall. Well, if you're committing crime, even the most minute of stuff, your cell phone now lets them know what laws you're violating. And so let's say you decide to speak up for your free speech rights or something, or you decide to exercise your constitutional rights in other ways. They can say, well, you know what? We have him, we know he does this illegal and that illegal. We're going to go ahead and enforce the law against him now. It creates a form of blackmail against the average citizen, their ability to track everything that you do. Yeah. So if you are violating the law, or you ever have, the government's going to know. And if you decide you're going to be one of these people that stands up for your rights, or you want to fight for the rights of others, or do political things that they don't particularly like, they're just going to flip the switch on you and say, yeah, we're going to drag him into criminal court for the stuff we know that he did 5 years ago. Yeah. There's a 7-year, 10-year statute of limitations. We know that he violated prohibition laws a few years ago. He may be law-abiding now, but we don't like the kind of speech he does and says.
Yeah.
So we're going to pull the hammer, and we're going to pull out the evidence we have on him from a few years ago and send him to prison and teach him a lesson and have a deterrent effect against other citizens. So there's a huge danger now of all of our rights being taken away as a result of all this tech. Now, we're going to live in this world of tech whether we like it or not. So again, one thing I always tell younger people is just stay away from crime altogether. Do not give the government any reason at all to squelch your rights in the future, or mess with your employment in the future, or anything like that, because if you violate the law, even if they don't prosecute you now, they're going to have you on their list somewhere.
Yeah.
And they're going to know what you did
somewhere.
And they'll use it against
tower,
you.
Saving it all.
Yeah, absolutely, bro. And absolutely, so, and you know what? Another thing I tell young people is all of the effort that it takes to violate the law, if you just did a fraction of that effort legitimately, you'd probably be a successful business owner.
Yeah.
I do very well now. I have a home improvement business, right? And I can talk about my old, mob stories and weed stories or whatever. And I do a fraction of the effort that it took for me to hide what I used to do.
Yeah.
You have to, back even in the 90s, bro, you'd have to take so much effort to conceal your activities. You have to hide the money. You can't throw all the money into banks at one time. If you put more than 10 grand into a bank, it's automatically going to the DEA. If you made a purchase of $10,000 or more back in the 90s, for a car, it's your name's going to the FBI, the IRS, the DEA, all the state law enforcement agencies.
Yeah.
They do so much stuff
Could
to
have started a real business by then.
Yeah. You could have been doing
When you
things
got
the
your
right
bank
way.
loan and had your business plan
And a lot less
started.
stress.
Yeah.
A lot less stress.
Yeah.
And, so it's the same skills, just apply it the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And all these mobsters, the smart mobsters now, are the ones that quit and now do legitimate business. And there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of guys. I'm a Gen Xer. I just turned 49 a few days ago. And there's a lot of dudes in our age group, that are north of, let's say, 45, that saw the writing on the wall in the 90s. We could see where technology was going. We could see that you weren't going to win, that you're not going to be a lifetime mobster or a lifetime racketeer.
Take a lot of that money and just throw it in the market. Buy a bunch of Yahoo stocks, buy a bunch of... What is this Google thing? I don't know. I'm gonna throw some money at it in the stock market.
Yeah, there's a lot of dudes that did that kind of thing.
Live off that
just
10% a year.
Yeah, or just moved into the legitimate business world.
Yeah.
Even if you go belly up in the criminal world, let's say you had to fight cases to where you had to spend a fortune on lawyers, you still have all those skills though. And being in the weed business or illegal gambling and stuff, you still had to deal with customers. You still have all, aside from all the illegal stuff, you still had all the normal pitfalls of running a regular business. I know guys that were in the weed business and the illegal gambling business who never got busted by the DEA or the local cops. They lost out because they went bankrupt the same way a normal business goes bankrupt.
Yeah.
You spend too much money and not enough money's coming in, right?
Mm.
All the same pitfalls that a small business owner has, you also have.
Yeah.
I know guys that, they did very well for a number of years and they made a few bad business choices and, voila, they lost their business.
Yeah.
But, overall, though, I'd say it was a positive experience, though, for me. Because I got to really meet people on a level that you would normally not get to meet them on. There's no regulation whatsoever in that old world. It was literally the last vestige of true capitalism, in America, for me at least.
Yeah. We got some good movies out of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And there might be some more. I've got a good number of friends, all of whom have been in it. And I've been talking to some people that are in that whole entertainment world.
Yeah.
And, we'll see. But some of the stuff that I know of would make for great stories.
Yeah.
Great movie lines. I just want to make sure that one thing I don't like about Hollywood is I want to make sure that the stuff is told right, though. I hate the way that they Hollywood up certain things. Mm-hmm. Oh, there's some stuff my friends and I are actually working on.
Yeah.
And I'm now finding myself getting involved with some pretty big podcasts and, so there's some stuff I won't get into right now on your podcast.
Yeah. Where can people find you at? That's actually a good little segment
to
wrap
Mob
up.
True Crime. Instagram, Mob True Crime. YouTube, Mob True Crime. I'm going to start up a TikTok, even though we were talking about government stuff. I guess apparently the Chinese government can spy on it, but I'm sure the Chinese government probably can spy on everything else too.
My stuff's already doesn't even matter at this point.
I think everything I do is a public record at this point.
I actually learned pretty good stuff on TikTok because it seems like Instagram, they kind of shut things down. Like if you look up certain things and you look it up
Sure.
on TikTok,
Censorship.
you're like, whoa, I didn't know that was going on in Europe right now, but they won't. So I think that's kind of why they want to get rid of it too. It's it's the wild, wild west.
Hey, I'm glad that I can help, because I went through a lot of crazy stuff, and my main goal at the end of the day here is to make sure that younger people, especially younger dudes that are vulnerable to this stuff, don't follow in that same footsteps. You know, I look at it now and I realize that I was manipulated by older dudes that saw my skills back then. You know, I was street smart and I could handle myself. Going to college really softened me up in many ways, and becoming a regular citizen, and I'm glad that that's how it evolved. But back then, I had a high IQ. I was very intelligent, but I was using my skills for street stuff and for negativity. And older dudes saw that, and that's what they do. Older gangsters and mobsters and other guys like that, they find younger guys with brains and brawn, or both, or a little bit of both, we'll say, and they manipulate them with, you know, promises of wealth and riches, and it almost never really materializes. And so my main goal, my number one goal when I do all this stuff and with all my stuff, is to make sure that younger dudes that are like who I was, especially very smart ones, and guys that aren't scared of the cops either. Like I was not scared of the police or going to jail or juvenile hall when I was a kid. I just was not. It didn't intimidate me. That those kinds of kids understand. Don't do it. Exercise. You use your minds and your skills for positive things, and you know, that's my number one goal. Ultimately, is to keep vulnerable younger dudes that were like me away from the predatory guys that are in their 40s and 50s that do manipulate dudes in their late teens and early 20s to doing what I did.
Yeah.
You know, don't try this at home, kids.
Well, through some of your podcast stories, they might think twice and think, oh, yeah, prison's not for me.
A good portion of my friends are no longer living.
Yeah.
And nearly all of us, I'm talking 90% of my bros that are alive that were involved, we hit some stage of the criminal justice system. Some federal cases and having to do federal time, others state time in the California system, and other ones. Some had to do both. In my case, I still, even though I only had probationary terms and short stints in the county system, I still didn't leave unscathed, and it still took a part of my soul along with me. You know, there's a part of you that you don't get back when you sell your soul to the devil for a while, even if it's a temporary kind of thing. And so, you know, the overall message is that, you know, just apply your skills for the positive things.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you're gonna find 30 years later, you're gonna be in a way better spot than all your friends that took the hard way through. I have friends from high school who could have easily done the same things that I did. Instead, they did not, and they're doing either the same or better than me.
Yeah.
And so, for all you younger dudes out there that think these shortcuts are winning ways to go, take it from me. You're going to find in 20 or 30 years that when you start to measure against the guys that do take the shortcuts, you're going to be way ahead.
Yeah.
So don't waste your time.
Damn.
Don't
That's
waste
a good
your
way
time.
to wrap it up, man. That's a solid message. Yeah. Awesome, Jeff. Well, like I said, I'm going to put all your stuff down below. People can check your interviews out. Some really interesting guests on there. It's pretty wild stories. But we'll have to have you back on.
Cool,
hit
bro.
some more of those stories.
I appreciate it. Time flies when you're having fun, bro.
Yep.
Thanks for having me on.
No, definitely. All right, guys. Jeff Crowe. Make sure you go follow him, listen to his stories, and we'll see you guys on the next one.